Seoul's Olympic Stadium trembled as if it were a living organism pushed beyond its limits. Sound did not merely fill the air, it crushed it, wave after wave of human voices colliding into a single, overwhelming force. 60,000 people screamed his name in unison, the controlling, the counter-tinturn rolling through the stands like thunder trapped beneath steel and concrete. It was devotion, obsession, worship, the kind of noise that erased individuality and turned a crowd into a single, ravenous heartbeat. At the center of it all, Ryu Minjai stood on the hydraulic lift as it began its slow ascent. The platform vibrated beneath his boots, a mechanical heartbeat lifting him toward the blinding promise of the stage. In his ears, the in-ear monitors buzzed sharply, cutting through the roar with clinical precision. A voice broke through, steady and rehearsed, counting down the seconds that would decide everything. 3, 2, 1, smile, Ryu. The world is watching. Minjae smiled on command. The expression settled onto his face with practiced ease, shaped by 10 years of mirrors, cameras, and fan meetings. His cheeks lifted, his eyes softened, every muscle performing exactly as it had been trained to do. Yet behind that flawless exterior, something essential was missing. His chest felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out of him, leaving nothing but pressure and panic behind. Breathing became an effort. The oxygen refused to feel real in his lungs. The stage lights exploded into life, unbearably bright, slicing through his vision until the world fractured into harsh lines and burning white. The screams no longer sounded like cheers. They warped into shrill sirens, urgent and endless, screaming danger instead of love. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He stepped onto the stage, each footfall heavy, delayed, as though he were moving through water. The opening notes of Eternal Night began to play, familiar and precise, a song he had performed hundreds of times. Muscle memory guided him to his mark. This was the moment that always felt automatic. This was where he was supposed to belong. He opened his mouth to sing the first note. The instant stretched, thin and fragile. His throat tightened, his voice caught somewhere deep inside his chest, and no matter how desperately he tried to push it out, nothing emerged. Silence, vast and terrifying, replaced the song. In that silence, his vision tilted. The stadium lights smeared together, collapsing into a single, blinding white star that swallowed everything else. His knees buckled. The world dropped out from under him. Ryu Minjai collapsed on the stage, the echo of 60,000 voices crashing into stunned confusion as his body hit the floor. The aftermath unfolded, not as a single story, but as fragments scattered across screens and headlines around the world. Voices overlapped, urgent and speculative, stripped of nuance and mercy. Breaking news: Eclipse leader Ryu collapses on stage. Stardust Entertainment claims it is heat exhaustion. Breaking: Ryu Minjae missing from hospital room. Where is Ryu? The global manhunt begins. The truth was far less dramatic and far more human. Minjae was not kidnapped. No shadowy figures dragged him away. He simply woke in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic, stared at the ceiling for a long time, and decided he could not stay. He walked out the back door unnoticed, pulled a hoodie over his head, and disappeared into the city that had once belonged to him. He boarded a bus without looking at the route, then a ferry where the wind cut sharp and clean across his face. When the roads ended, he kept walking. Streetlights gave way to darkness, concrete to uneven ground. Step by step, he moved forward until his legs shook and finally refused to carry him any farther. All he wanted was distance, not just from the stadium, or the cameras, or the headlines, but from the noise itself. He wanted to go where the noise stopped. Jeju Island was never gentle when it wanted to make itself known. That night, the storm rose from the sea like a living thing. wind clawing at the cliffs, rain slashing sideways, and waves throwing themselves against jagged black rocks with reckless fury. The sea-glass cottage stood alone against it all, its windows glowing faintly, its wooden frame groaning softly as if breathing with the weather. The air smelled of salt, wet earth, and ozone, and the ocean's roar swallowed every other sound until the world felt reduced to wind, water, and waiting. Raven Sterling loved storms, not in a careless or romantic way, but with a deep, practiced intimacy. Wrapped in a thick wool blanket on her porch, she sat perfectly still, letting the cold mist kiss her cheeks while the wind tugged at loose strands of her dark braids. In her hands was a mug of hot tea, steam curling upward only to be torn apart by the gale. No phone rested beside her, no buzzing notifications, and no glowing screens. There was only the angry ocean and the steady grounding rhythm of her own breath. Her gaze traced the chaos below the cliffs, following the white scars of foam as waves shattered themselves against stone. That was when something broke the pattern. At first, it barely registered, a shape where there should have been none, too angular for driftwood and too still for a seal. Raven leaned forward, heart slowing rather than racing, her eyes sharpening as years of solitude-trained observation took over. The storm had not brought debris alone. It had delivered a person. She set her mug down with deliberate care, the ceramic clicking softly against the porch railing. In one smooth motion, she reached for her raincoat and slung it on, fingers already numb from the cold. A heavy flashlight followed, its weight solid and reassuring in her grip. The moment she stepped off the porch, the wind lunged at her, whipping her braids across her face as she took the wooden steps 2 at a time, boots thudding as rain soaked through everything. The beach was chaos up close. Sand stung her ankles, and the roar of the sea felt louder and closer, as if it might surge forward at any second and reclaim whatever dared stand on its shore. She reached the figure lying at the edge of the tide. It was a young man, sprawled face down in wet sand, his body shaking uncontrollably. His clothes made no sense, a thin hospital gown stuffed into black jeans and an oversized hoodie clinging to him like a second skin, completely soaked through. "Hey!" Her voice barely cut through the wind as she crouched and turned him over with both hands. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness and landed on his face, and Raven froze for half a breath. Even half drowned and half frozen, he was startlingly beautiful. His lips were blue, his skin pale beneath streaks of sand, and his features were so fine they felt unreal, like a porcelain doll cracked and left out in the storm. His hair plastered to his forehead was a shocking, unnatural platinum blonde. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wild, pupils blown wide with fear. He sucked in a shallow breath, his chest trembling as if every inhale hurt.
"No cameras, please. No cameras."
The words came out rasped and broken, spoken in Korean and thick with terror rather than accusation. Raven did not hesitate. She adjusted the flashlight so it shone away from his eyes, her movements efficient and practiced. "I do not have a camera. I have a flashlight, and you have hypothermia. Get up." Her Korean was calm and fluent, stripped of emotion and designed to anchor rather than alarm. He tried to obey, muscles twitching as he attempted to push himself upright. His legs buckled immediately and dumped his weight back into the sand. Raven exhaled sharply, more annoyed at physics than at him. "Okay, we are doing this the hard way." She hooked his arm over her shoulder and hauled him up, her boots digging into the wet sand for leverage. Years of hauling firewood, patching roofs, and living without help had carved strength into her body. He was light, too light, but dead weight all the same. Step by step, she dragged him up the stairs until they burst through the cottage door and into blessed warmth. Inside, the contrast was shocking. The roar of the wind dulled, replaced by the steady crackle of a wood stove. Raven guided him forward and dumped him onto the thick rug in front of the fire. She grabbed towels from a nearby chair and tossed them onto his chest and legs. Strip. Wet clothes off. Now, or you die of pneumonia. The boy stared up at her, confusion etched into every line of his face. There was no scream and no frantic grab for a phone, just orders and action. It seemed to disorient him more than the storm had. His voice, when it came, was barely louder than the fire.
Who are you?
I am the woman saving your life. Now dry off. I will make soup. Min-jae lay on the rug as the heat began its slow work, seeping into his bones inch by inch, painful and wonderful all at once. His shivering eased from violent to mild, and his breathing gradually steadied. He blinked and took in his surroundings. Books stacked everywhere, with worn spines. Old vinyl records leaning against the wall, and bundles of sage and drying herbs hanging from wooden beams. The air smelled of smoke and earth and something comforting he could not name. It was quiet, not the artificial quiet of soundproof rooms, but a living silence broken only by the pop of burning wood. For the first time in 10 years, there was no hum of electricity and no managers shouting demands. The absence pressed down on him as heavily as the storm outside, and his exhausted mind finally surrendered. Min-jae closed his eyes, and the world slipped gently and mercifully into black. Morning arrived gently at the cottage, not with alarms or flashing screens, but with scent. The rich bitterness of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the small rooms, followed by the indulgent aroma of bacon sizzling in a pan. It was a smell that carried weight, memory, and temptation, utterly foreign to the regimented mornings Min-jae had known for years. Min-jae stirred beneath unfamiliar blankets as consciousness returned in fragments. He pushed himself upright, heart racing before his mind fully caught up. His body felt strangely light and unguarded. When his eyes adjusted, he realized he was wearing an oversized t-shirt that read, "I hate Mondays," and plaid pajama pants that pooled around his ankles. His hands flew to his face in instinctive urgency. His fingers traced bare skin with no illusion to hide behind. Panic surged up his spine, tightening his chest as questions spiraled through his mind about where he was and whether the world had already closed in on him again. He stumbled out of the guest room and crossed the cool wooden floor toward the kitchen. Each step felt like crossing a threshold into danger or revelation. Music reached him, warm and analog, carried by the crackle of an old jazz record spinning ahead. In the kitchen, Raven was dancing without performing or posing, just moving. Sunlight slanted through the window as dust motes floated in its path. She swayed to the music, with a spatula in one hand, while eggs hissed gently in the pan, looking utterly free. Min-jae cleared his throat, the sound awkward and tentative, like an intrusion into a private world. Raven spun around with the spatula raised on instinct, her eyes sharp before softening into amusement. "Oh, Sleeping Beauty is awake." "Good morning." Min-jae scanned the counters and tables, patting at his empty pockets with rising urgency.
Where's my phone?
Raven turned back to the stove as if the question were trivial. "You did not have one when I found you, and I do not have one either. I buried mine in the garden 3 months ago." She gestured toward the small wooden table already set with plates and mismatched cutlery. "Sit, eat." Min-jae stared at the food as if it were contraband. The bacon glistened and the eggs sat imperfect and human. Old rules surged forward as his throat tightened.
I am on a strict diet, no carbs, no sodium.
Raven laughed, full and unrestrained, filling the kitchen. "Look around, pretty boy. Does this look like a K-pop dorm? You are skinny as a rail. Sit down and eat the damn bacon." The words, "pretty boy," landed strangely on him. She did not recognize his famous face. There was no awe in her eyes, only blunt honesty. Min-jae sat and ate. Flavor detonated across his senses with grease, salt, heat, and joy. He finished everything on the plate as his eyes stung. Raven poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him with open curiosity. So, what is your name? And do not lie to me. I pulled you out of the ocean. The question froze him. Names carried power, and his mind raced through the consequences.
Minchai.
He used his birth name, a sound that felt both foreign and intimate. Okay, Min-jae. I am Raven. You can stay here until the storm passes, but you have to work. I do not run a hotel. The word hit him harder than expected.
Work?
I have a garden to weed, and the fence needs painting. The leader of Eclipse stared at her as if she had asked him to breathe underwater.
I do not know how to paint.
Raven shrugged and turned back to her coffee. Then you will learn. 2 weeks passed in a way that felt unreal, like time itself had softened around the edges. In that quiet coastal house, days bled gently into one another, marked not by schedules or alarms, but by light, weather, and the slow rhythm of manual work. Min-jae had learned to paint walls, railings, and weather-beaten wood. Flecks of white and blue clung to his platinum hair and smudged the bridge of his nose, a visible record of honest labor. He loved the mess of it. Each stain felt like proof that in this forgotten corner of the world, he was no longer an untouchable idol or a manufactured image. He was simply a man, awkward and unpolished, holding a brush while helping Raven repair a sagging porch under an open sky. What he loved even more was the anonymity. There were no cameras, no choreography, and no managers whispering about angles and marketability. The silence around him was vast and forgiving. In that silence, Min-jae found himself watching Raven without meaning to. She could sit for hours, facing the sea, with her leather notebook balanced on her knee, eyes tracing the horizon. Sometimes she wrote furiously. Sometimes she only stared, humming melodies that felt ancient. Her world was untamed and raw, and in her authenticity, he sensed a freedom he had never been allowed to touch. One rainy afternoon, when the sky collapsed into shades of gray and the sea dissolved into mist, Min-jae wandered into the living room to escape the chill. That was when he noticed a dusty, upright piano tucked into the corner beneath uneven stacks of books and notebooks. He moved them aside, exposing the worn keys. The piano was badly out of tune, but the sound that emerged was warm and human. He sat down, shoulders relaxing, and began to play. He did not reach for the polished songs that had made him famous. Instead, his hands found a slow, aching ballad he had been forbidden to release. As the rain intensified outside, he closed his eyes and began to sing softly, as if afraid the song might break if pushed too hard.
The lights are blinding, but I can't see. The noise is deafening, but you can't hear me.
He was so lost in the music that he did not notice Raven watching from the doorway. When he finally opened his eyes, her focused gaze made heat rush to his face, leaving him feeling exposed in a way no stage ever had. You didn't tell me you could do that.
It's just a hobby.
Raven crossed the room and sat beside him on the narrow piano bench, close enough that his heart stumbled. Don't give me that. That technique and that breath control make you a professional. Her eyes dropped to his hands, resting on the keys, hands that had once performed in sold-out arenas, and now trembled slightly. You're Ryu. The name shattered the fragile peace he had built. He pulled his hands away from the piano, shoulders caving inward.
You knew?
No, I do not watch television. But I know music, and I heard your voice on the radio yesterday. They are looking for you, Min-jae. The whole world thinks you might be dead. The words drained the color from his face. He bent forward, burying his face in his hands as fear finally caught up to him.
Please do not call them. Please.
I am not going to call anyone. I ran away too.
You.
She met his eyes with a vulnerability that mirrored his own. I used to be a songwriter in Los Angeles. I wrote 3 Grammy-winning songs, but nobody knows my name. The labels took my lyrics and treated me like a machine. I had a breakdown, so I came here to find my voice again. She opened her leather notebook and placed it on the piano stand. I wrote this, but I cannot find the melody. Maybe you can. Min-jae read the lyrics, each line striking something unspoken inside him. One line felt like a confession pulled straight from his chest. I built a castle out of glass, but forgot to build a door. Play. His fingers returned to the keys, shaping a melody around her words. Raven joined in, her voice weaving with his as rain pounded the roof. They were not just making music, they were stitching their wounds together with sound. When the last note faded, Min-jae turned to her, struck by her quiet beauty.
Raven.
Min-jae. He leaned in, and she closed the distance. Their kiss was slow and uncertain, before deepening into something overwhelming, filled with desperation and relief. For the first time in his life, the eternal night inside his heart cracked open, and light poured in. 1 month had passed, and in the quiet stretch of days, happiness had settled over them like a fragile spell. It was not loud or extravagant. It was domestic, ordinary, and therefore precious. Mornings smelled of coffee and sea air, and evenings ended with shared meals and soft laughter. Their lives shrank to a gentle bubble where nothing existed beyond the rhythm of their breathing and the comfort of each other's presence. Inside that bubble, Min-jae was no longer a hunted star, and Raven was no longer alone. At the village market, Min-jae moved carefully through the narrow aisles. A beanie was pulled low over his hair, and a mask hid half his face, yet there was something unmistakably lighter about him. He held Raven's hand as if anchoring himself to the earth, his grip warm and steady. With his free arm, he carried the groceries, the weight of vegetables and rice feeling reassuringly mundane. When he smiled, it was not practiced or performative. It was real, reaching all the way to his eyes and softening years of exhaustion. But happiness, like a soap bubble drifting through sunlight, could not survive sharp edges. Near the squid stand, laughter erupted as a group of tourists from Seoul posed for selfies, their voices bright and careless. One phone lingered longer than the others, its camera drifting past the stalls and signs until it caught something strange in the background. A pair of familiar eyes, famous eyes, sparked recognition that began quietly and then turned electric.
Wait, is that his eyes?
The sound of the shutter was small and almost polite, a single click that seemed harmless. In that instant, the bubble began to collapse as the photo was uploaded with idle curiosity. Words followed quickly, fueled by disbelief and excitement, spreading faster than anyone could take them back. Found him? Is this Ryu in Jeju with a foreigner? Time accelerated mercilessly as speculation turned into certainty, and certainty into obsession. Within hours, helicopters sliced through the island air, their shadows crawling across fields and rooftops. Soon after, a black car arrived like an omen, delivering CEO Kim to the edge of the sanctuary they had built. Evening had fallen by the time Min-jae and Raven stood in the kitchen, cooking dinner together. The house was filled with the quiet music of domestic life until engines roared outside and megaphones tore through the walls.
Mr. Min-jae, come out. We know you are in there.
The ladle slipped from Min-jae's hand and clattered against the floor as panic seized him. His hands trembled, and his breath shortened as old terror rushed back into the present.
They found me. The noise is back.
Raven moved instantly, cupping his face and forcing his gaze to meet hers. Look at me, Min-jae, look at me. Breathe. She stayed with him, breathing in sync and refusing to let the world steal him away. You are safe. I will not let them in. Heavy pounding shook the door, relentless and authoritative.
Open up. This is Stardust Entertainment.
Raven opened the door and stepped forward, gripping a baseball bat as cameras flashed outside.
Who the hell are you? Where is my asset?
He is not an asset. He is a person. He is having dinner. Get off my porch. CEO Kim scoffed and gestured dismissively, treating Min Jae like an entry on a ledger.
Do you know how much money he is losing us?
When he tried to push past her, Raven stopped him cold, the bat halting inches from his face. I said, "Get back." Cameras erupted in a frenzy, already shaping the headlines. From behind her, Min Jae stepped forward and faced the cameras and the strangers who felt entitled to him. When he looked at Raven, fierce and unyielding, understanding settled heavily in his chest. To save her, he knew he had to leave her.
Stop.
His voice carried as he stepped in front of Raven and gently lowered the bat from her hands.
I am coming back. I have to. They will not leave you alone unless I go. I cannot let them ruin your sanctuary.
"You are my sanctuary." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, a goodbye disguised as a promise.
Wait for me.
He walked into the storm of flashing lights as bodyguards closed in around him. With every step, Min Jae disappeared and Ryu returned. Raven remained on the porch, alone, watching the cars pull away into the night. When silence finally returned, it no longer felt peaceful. It felt hollow. 1 month after the silence that had swallowed him whole, Ryu returned to Seoul like a ghost, reclaiming a body that no longer felt entirely his. The studio lights were harsh and clinical, reflecting off chrome surfaces and polished floors. A far cry from the soft shadows of the cottage he still carried in his bones. Every corridor hummed with anticipation, staff whispering as he passed, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might make him vanish again. The studio itself was alive with movement, cables coiled like sleeping snakes, stylists gliding between stations, producers murmuring into headsets. This was the machinery of a comeback, efficient and merciless. Ryu stood at its center, technically present, emotionally elsewhere, preparing for a concert that was already being called legendary before a single note had been played.
The disappearance was great PR. The fans are going crazy. The mystery woman story is fading. We'll say she was a crazy local who held you hostage.
CEO Kim's voice was bright, almost giddy, cutting through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. To him, the past month was a narrative problem neatly solved, a scandal smoothed into profit. He paced as he spoke, hands slicing the air, already imagining headlines, numbers, and redemption arcs that belonged more to marketing decks than to human lives. Min Jae sat in the stylist's chair, shoulders slumped as chemicals burned his scalp. The familiar sting of bleach seeped into his skin, sharp and invasive, grounding him in a body that felt exhausted beyond repair. He stared into the mirror, into eyes rimmed with shadow, into a face sculpted by exhaustion and survival. He did not look reborn. He looked hollowed out, like something that had lived through a storm and barely remained standing. His reflection offered no comfort. It looked dead, or close enough to it that the difference felt academic. Yet his hand remained clenched in his pocket, fingers curled tightly around a fragile piece of paper. The lyrics Raven had written, the song they had made together.
I'm not singing Eternal Night.
The words dropped into the room without warning, calm but unyielding. Stylists froze mid-motion. The hum of equipment suddenly felt too loud, as if the walls themselves were listening.
What?
CEO Kim turned sharply, confusion etched into his brow, irritation already rising like a tide.
That's the title track. I wrote a new song while I was away.
Min Jae pushed himself up from the chair, the motion slow but deliberate, as if gravity itself were resisting him. The cape slid from his shoulders and pooled at his feet. For the first time since his return, he stood at his full height, eyes steady, voice quiet but immovable.
And I'm performing it, or I walk. And this time, I'll live stream my suicide note before I go.
The room seemed to contract around those words. CEO Kim's face drained of color as reality finally pierced the armor of strategy. He saw it then, not a bluff, not theatrics, but a man standing at the edge, utterly unafraid to step off. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating.
Fine, one song.
The concession tasted bitter, but it was given. The machine adjusted, reluctantly, around a single, immovable truth. The Soul Dome pulsed with life on the night of the concert, a living organism fed by thousands of voices and beating hearts. Outside, fans gathered in waves, light sticks glowing like constellations against the dark. Inside, the air vibrated with expectation, a collective breath held for too long. When the lights went down, the darkness was absolute. Then, slowly, a single spotlight bloomed at the center of the stage, revealing Min-jae seated at a grand piano. There were no backup dancers, no spectacle to hide behind, just a man, a piano, and the truth he could no longer carry alone. He adjusted the bench almost imperceptibly, fingers hovering above the keys, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of memory. The crowd quieted, sensing instinctively that this was not a performance meant to entertain, but a confession meant to survive. His voice entered the microphone softly, fragile, yet it carried to the farthest corners of the dome.
Is for the person who found me when I was lost, the person who taught me how to breathe. I built a castle out of glass.
His voice cracked slightly on the opening line, raw and unfiltered. The melody wound its way through the dome, haunting in its simplicity. Written by Raven Sterling. The name ignited a wave of murmurs, confusion spreading like electricity through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in on Min-jae's face as he sang, eyes closed now, every note drawn from a place too deep to fake. He sang of the storm that nearly took him, of the warmth of soup offered without questions, of a garden that taught him patience, and of a love that asked nothing but honesty. When the final note faded, it lingered in the air. Min-jae lifted his head and looked directly into the camera, into millions of watching eyes, into the future he was no longer willing to deny.
I'm not hiding anymore. I love her.
For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Silence claimed the dome, profound and sacred. Then the applause rose, not the frenzy of idol worship, but something deeper, a sustained roar of support carrying him forward into whatever came next. The cottage on Jeju Island was wrapped in a quiet that felt earned, the kind of silence that only comes after storms, both literal and emotional, had finally passed. The old television sat crookedly on a wooden table, its screen flickering with imperfect colors and static hiss, rescued from obscurity and coaxed back to life by Raven's stubborn hands. On it, the concert continued to play, lights blazing, a sea of fans roaring from miles away. Raven sat close with her knees drawn in, as if proximity might anchor the image to her reality. Tears slid freely down her cheeks, not hurried and not hidden. They were the slow, heavy tears of release. He had done it. Against contracts, threats, and fear, he had stood on that stage and told the truth. Her chest ached with the weight of it all, the years of secrecy, the loneliness of exile, and the constant question of whether love could survive the machinery of fame. Each sob felt like a thread being pulled loose from a knot she had carried too long. Outside, the ocean breathed steadily, waves rolling in with a patient rhythm, as if the island itself were listening. Then a sharp, unmistakable knock cut through the fragile calm. The moment snapped, taut. Instinct took over as Raven wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her breath hitching while she reached for the bat resting against the wall, its worn handle fitting her grip like a promise of defense. She crossed the small room with measured steps, the floorboards murmuring beneath her feet. Fear rehearsed its familiar possibilities in her mind, the furious CEO and the hungry, relentless press. She opened the door with her shoulders squared, ready for confrontation. But the night air carried something else entirely. It was not authority or intrusion that stood before her. It was Minjai. He filled the doorway with the disarray of someone who had run without stopping, his white silk stage shirt clinging to him, damp with sweat and catching the porch light like a relic from another world. His hair was undone, his chest rising and falling fast, as if he had sprinted straight out of the spotlight and into her life.
I quit.
The words landed between them with deceptive simplicity, reverberating louder than the ocean behind him. Raven stared as the bat slipped from her fingers, her grip giving way to shock. What? The bat hit the floor with a dull thud and was forgotten. Minjai stepped inside without waiting for permission, as if the threshold had never truly separated them. His gaze traveled the room slowly and reverently, taking in the wood stove darkened by years of use, and the shelves lined with books whose spines bore the creases of love and repetition. This place was quiet and grounded. Everything his other life was not. When he spoke again, his voice steadied with resolve.
Well, I did not quit the band, but I quit the dorm, I quit the rules.
He moved deeper into the cottage, his fingers brushing the back of a chair as if committing the space to memory, even while claiming it. The words kept coming, faster now and buoyed by certainty.
I bought the land next door, I am building a studio here, I am going to work remotely, and I am going to fire CEO Kim.
Raven's disbelief softened into something fragile and bright. Hope, cautious but undeniable, lifted her chest. See, can you do that? Minjay turned back to her, a familiar smirk cutting through the exhaustion on his face, an expression that had once charmed millions from behind a polished persona, but now belonged only to this room.
I am Ryu. I am the biggest star in the world. I can do whatever I want, and what I want is to finish painting your fence.
Laughter burst from Raven, surprised and unrestrained, as if joy had finally found permission to exist. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and threw her arms around his neck, holding him with a strength born of fear finally letting go. You missed a spot in the corner. Minjay's hands settled at her waist, warm and grounding.
I will fix it tomorrow.